I found this book called The Autobiography of Malcolm X.
Hmm.
And to my surprise, he was a Muslim. And I just had no idea that Muslims like predated my own family in
Yeah.
America. I just had no knowledge of the history of Islam in America at all until I saw this book. And it absolutely transformed my life. It transformed the way I think of myself. I went from being a Muslim in America to being an American Muslim, where I realized that these two identities were compatible, that in fact they were very natural to Islam has been a part of America since its inception and even before its inception.
You're listening to Wise Women with Daisy Khan, where faith rolls up its sleeves as a force for good, and where women define the future with wisdom and wonder. I'm Daisy Khan. Kindly subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Welcome to a new series, The Muslim Women Project, where I feature 100 Muslim women of power and authority, shaping their destiny, community, and society at large. Welcome back, everybody. Today, I have the honor of speaking with Dalia Mogahed. She's a researcher, strategist, and one of the most influential Muslim voices in America. She was the executive director of the Gallup Center for Muslim Studies and also the director of the Institute for Social Policy and Understanding in DC. She has a consulting firm that specializes in Muslim societies in Middle East. She authored a book, Who Speaks for Islam? And What a Billion Muslims Really Think. In a nutshell, friends, her work has shaped how our country understands Muslims. So today, I'd like to look a little bit beyond her public role and explore the woman behind the ideas, her journey, her faith, her struggles, and her triumphs, and her vision for where the American Muslim community is headed. So, Dalia, welcome to Wise Women.
Thank you so much, Daisy. It is so wonderful to be here.
I like to go back into the background of the person, the little Dalia, for a moment. Where were you born and what was it like growing up?
I was born in Cairo, Egypt, and I was raised in my grandmother's home because my mother had a very long commute to work and just couldn't afford to drive me anywhere to for childcare. It was one of those situations. So I grew up in my grandmother's home, and it was a home where the Quran was always being recited. My grandfather is a scholar of the Quran, well, was a scholar. I was drenched in a lot of love, attention from my uncles and aunts who lived there, and the Quran and religious studies. I was a very devoted little Muslim when I was young. I learned to pray when I was 4. I moved to the United States with my parents, and we moved to Madison, Wisconsin, from the Middle East to the Midwest, and started
That's a
my
book
life
title.
here.
That's your next book title, right?
My next book title, yeah.
Yeah.
But I was really a spiritual seeker from the beginning, and those were my roots.
Dalia, ever since I've known you, you've always been a very serious person.
You know, Daisy, I was always serious. I mean, this is so funny, but I'm the oldest daughter, and I have very much an oldest daughter personality. I had to take care of my sisters or my sister at a very young age, and I was seen as the wise one, the responsible one,
Yeah.
balancing out the wild sister who many people know as one of the most predominant speakers on Islam today, Yasmin, my
Mm.
younger sister. But growing up, I just took her anywhere I went. I had to take her with me, and so I had to be responsible and very serious. I guess even as a young person, it that kind of carefree childhood just wasn't what I experienced. I think immigrant parents rely on the oldest daughter to take care of things, especially my parents who were very busy as graduate students in engineering, pursuing their
Mm.
PhDs. I was responsible for a lot of, keeping the household moving and taking care of my sister.
Yeah. So then how does your mother describe you?
She actually was she describes me as responsible and a problem solver.
Hmm.
And I think that's pretty accurate. Um, I think that being, the daughter of immigrants and an oldest daughter does create a solid foundation for getting a lot of things done. We also have the syndrome of feeling too responsible for things
Yeah.
and sometimes taking on too much.
Yeah. Well, we're also the cultural translators, right? For
Absolutely.
for the parent generation, and then we're like kind of navigating the American culture and trying to bring it into the home and explaining it to everyone. Right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's not something that most Americans, growing up have to deal with. And so you mentioned that, you were kind of steeped in this, faith-based
Mhm.
home. And when did your faith begin to influence how you saw yourself as an American Muslim or an American Muslim woman?
I remember this very clearly because I did grow up in a home that taught us that religion was important. And my mother and father were different than like my grandparents in that they were scientists and they absolutely were practicing Muslims, but really emphasized academics. And religion was more about the boundaries that kept us from going astray. Religion was more about the do's and don'ts, very much so as I was growing up. And so it felt at times growing up as something I was simply inheriting rather than something I was choosing for myself. And that really changed, and it was very interesting how it happened. I attended public school in Madison, Wisconsin, and it was Black History Month, and I had to do a book report on a civil rights leader. And I found this book called The Autobiography of Malcolm X.
Hmm.
And to my surprise, he was a Muslim. And I just had no idea that Muslims like predated my own family in
Yeah.
America. I just had no knowledge of the history of Islam in America at all until I I saw this book, and it absolutely transformed my life. It transformed the way I think of myself. I went from being a Muslim in America to being an American Muslim, where I realized that these two identities were compatible, that in fact they were very natural to Islam has been a part of America since its inception and even before its inception. And when I learned this, that something I was so passionate about, civil rights and equity, was something that Islam informed, that a figure like Malcolm X, who played such a pivotal role in Black liberation, drew on the Islamic tradition to inform his views and his activism. And when I discovered this, it created this compatibility between my identity as an Egyptian American, um, you know, and a Muslim.
Dalia, because many of us, even with the hyphenated identities, somewhat feel a little fragmented. And
Mhm.
there are these moments when you read about the history that fuses those two identities together, and you don't feel the fragmentation anymore. You feel the gap just closed. And these are such important moments, and a lot of books have influenced many of us, including myself. I've been influenced by many books. But was that the first time you realized that you could make a difference, or was that just your identity formation? Well, later on, I'm sure in life, because you clearly are very accomplished and have an MBA. I mean, why did you choose this work?
Reading the autobiography of Malcolm X, is it wakes you. It helps you understand that there's so much work to be done in the path of human liberation. And that what I learned by reading this book is that Islam, my faith, had a part to play in that. Before that, it was just the religion of my upbringing, taught me, things like I have to pray or I can't eat pork. But the idea that there was this theology of liberation within my faith wasn't something I understood until reading this book. And after reading the book, I decided to read the Quran for myself, now as an explorer rather than just an inheritor of a faith. And by doing that, I discovered this incredible message of human liberation.
Mm.
And it just ignited in me a passion for working for liberation of all people in different forms. And that translated into a lot of college activism toward that goal. So I majored in chemical engineering,
And
since I'm
all Egyptians are engineers, right?
as a yes, as an Egyptian, that was kind of the obvious choice. So went the way of my parents, and majored in this very science oriented uh, area of study. One of just a handful of women in the department, and the only woman wearing hijab. So I
Mm.
also decided to wear hijab when I was 17, right before I started college, as a result of reading the Quran.
Mm.
That was an outgrowth of this discovery of my faith in a new way. So the first thing I did is I started writing for the college newspaper, the Daily Cardinal, and I would write about issues around Islamophobia, the Palestinian cause, things that I was passionate about. And then I eventually co-founded an organization called Truth in the Middle East, or Time. And we organized educational opportunities for folks to understand more about the Middle East and the conflicts that were, ensuing at the time. And then I also worked on the Bosnia genocide. So I was doing engineering and at the same time all of this liberation work at the same time. The only engineer by far in my undergraduate class that had anything to do with these kinds of causes.
Yeah. So, you mentioned the Bosnia genocide. I remember when that was happening, I was so stunned by what was happening to women that I
Yeah.
organized. And then, because I was more than the arts, I organized one of the benefits of a Qawwali, Nusrat Fateh Ali. He came into town, Alice Tully Hall. 2,000 people were in the room and we raised money. That's how I got my activism going. Isn't that
That's
amazing?
so interesting.
Yeah.
It's such an interesting story. I have a very similar one. We invited the founder of Women for Women,
Salbi,
and
Zainab Salbi.
Salbi,
Yeah, yeah,
Zainab Salbi, and she came as a keynote speaker at this benefit dinner, and we had about 1,000 people show up. It was incredible. It was huge, and it was a fundraiser for Bosnian women.
yeah.
So it's so interesting that we have that connection, that we have that in common.
Was there a challenging time that you had to reach back into your faith?
Oh, there are so many, there are
So many.
countless times. I, you know, after graduating from college, I got married and had my first child, and then the horrific events of 9/11 happened, and we had just moved to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And I remember that first Friday of the week of the attacks, we were really not sure if we should even go to the mosque because there were warnings about possible attacks on the mosque because of the understandable anger that was and grief that people were experiencing. But when we did go, we ended up going anyway, and found that a full half of the congregation that day were non-Muslims, who had come not to be angry at us, but to show us solidarity. And
Mm,
it was such a moving experience for me.
yeah.
And so I decided to rediscover my activism, to be that cultural and religious translator. Now,
Mm,
where my faith came in is in offering me the strength to keep reaching out, even when it felt like so much of the climate at the time, overall was so hostile. Now,
Hmm.
those folks that came to our mosque were the best of America. But there
Hmm.
was another side, and there were laws being passed. I mean, there were things like the Patriot Act and the war in Iraq, and all of these things were happening, and it was very easy to feel alienated and the sense that the world is against you, and there's all this hostility against your identity and your faith. And what kept me still reaching back out and not giving up on building connections and bridges was my faith, was the stories of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be
Hmm.
upon him, who never gave up on people, who never gave up on teaching and on standing for the truth, even when he was faced with unspeakable hostility. And so that was a real well of strength that I had to draw on at that time.
There are so many verses in the Quran that actually mandate us to do that, right? I mean,
Mhm.
you have this beautiful verse that I literally clutch on to, which is, we've created into nations and tribes so you may get to know one another. So you may get to know one another is almost like it's a commandment. And that's what was the basis of my interfaith, reaching across the aisle and getting to know the other. And I mean, we have so much in our faith that we can draw from when it comes to social change and social activism.
Absolutely. One that I cling to is cooperate for what is good and just, and do not cooperate for sin and enmity. And it's very clear, cooperate with everyone
Yeah.
as long as it's on what is good and just.
Yeah.
It's not stipulating who should be cooperated with. And I always think about that when I'm faced with a decision around, what to do or who to reach out to. Coalitions are important, and seeing people's humanity is important. Now,
Yeah.
having said that, I do want to clarify that when that cooperation requires you to compromise yourself or compromise what you believe or leave your identity at the door or your sense of justice at the door, then it is no longer based on what is good and just.
I want to fast forward a little bit because you are one of the most, well-known public figures in among American Muslims, at least of a certain generation, because we have a new crop coming up right now. Some of them don't know who we are, so I'm just letting the world know.
Absolutely.
Is there a favorite woman, past or present, whose example has guided your path? I know there are so many, but is there one that you look to?
You're absolutely right. There are so many. I would say someone like Linda Sarsour is someone I really admire for her courage, and someone who, though she's actually much younger than me, I feel has created a space for Muslim women in the mainstream that didn't exist before. I also look to women in the media that have created space where there wasn't before, mainstreaming things like hijab or mainstreaming a very open Muslim identity. When I think about the past, a woman that I deeply admire is Sayyidah Khadija
Mhm.
radiallahu anha. May Allah be pleased with her. She is the Prophet's wife who really supported and believed in him in a way that um, was incredible, and she was a professional in her own right. We look to her as an example of how a woman can be a leader, a business leader, a faith leader, and at the same time have a family and a successful, fulfilling marriage.
Yeah, I mean, she's the absolute exemplar, right, of a professional
Absolutely.
working woman who devoted her wealth to her husband, but at the same time, raised a family, had children. She did it all, right? Like
She
a
she
model
did. She
woman.
did it all. Yeah.
And so you're also an author, but you wrote this book, Who Speaks for Islam, and it took you years, like 6 years
Hmm.
and 50,000 interviews from across 35 countries. What surprised you the most about Muslims around the world and what they were saying, especially the things that Americans still get wrong about Muslims?
The most widespread misconception among American public about Muslims is the role of women and the standing of women within Islam and with the Muslim population. It's the one thing the right and the left agree on is that, this perception that Muslim women are oppressed.
Hmm.
So this is the biggest myth that I think exists is just this assumption that Muslims are more discriminatory than other people. Now, does misogyny exist in the Muslim community? Of course it does, and it exists across the board in all communities. And so when we did this research, what was most prominent and interesting to me, and indeed probably the most surprising thing to most people reading, is that Muslim women around the world absolutely love their faith. They believe their faith is a source of liberation, not a source of oppression. They want equal rights, and they believe that the way to get there is through their faith, not around it, not by eliminating it. And I think this is incredibly important and probably the most surprising part of the work for most people reading it is that it's not as if they don't know that equal rights exist, and it's not as if they don't want those same equal rights.
Yeah.
They absolutely do. What what I think is just a little bit different than public perception is that they don't see the path to those equal rights as through a secular frame. They see it as a very as compatible with their faith, as something that their faith already offers, and not something that has to um, make their faith change or eliminate it to get.
I think the double standard is so nauseating. I'm sick of it, especially with what's happening with the Epstein files and how long they've been buried and how they continue to be buried. And even though now we're supposed to see them, we don't know if any of these men that were trafficking girls and, abusing women left, right, and center, the most powerful men, are we ever going to see them jailed? I mean, you talk about misogyny in the Muslim world, yeah, or Muslim men, then what about the misogyny that exists right here in the homeland? I think that we need to take a look at ourselves before we start, pointing the fingers at others. Let's talk about the shifts happening in our community today. Do you think we're moving in the right direction? But also, I want to ask you two-sided questions here. I want to flip that question. And if so, where do you think we're still struggling or need to grow?
I think we've made enormous strides, and I do think we're moving in the right direction overall. One area that's very clear is civic engagement. American Muslims just 9 years ago in 2016 had a voter registration rate of just 60%, and now it's at 85%. And no other community has grown that fast in such a short time in their voter registration. Muslims are going and participating in campaigns and in town hall meetings and calling their representatives more than they ever have before, and at times even at greater rates than other faith communities. So we're really getting involved in our democracy more than we ever have. And that is exactly the right direction. Where we still need to grow, though,
Hmm.
is in the infrastructure that the American Muslim community needs to respond to crisis. So we have a situation right now where we've been watching a genocide take place over 2 years on our phones. And we, as an American Muslim community, have responded in a very sort of reactive patchwork type of way. There is not any enough coordination. There isn't enough organization around responding to this in a cohesive way to educate and to mobilize our community to do something for change.
So,
Yes.
what Muslims are capable of doing individually, which is each and every person running and representing themselves, we have been very successful with that. But whether we can navigate the halls of power, we still need a lot of work there. Now, I'd like to talk a little bit about what is happening with the surge of women's leadership. I mean, all of us, you, me, Linda, the people that we all know within our community, mostly were civil society leaders, right? We were doing the community building work. But now we're
Hmm.
seeing this incredible surge in women's political leadership, right? And you have Senator Hashmi, right, in your own backyard, and so many others. Do you think that this very thing can help our community not only grow, heal, and evolve, but also change the perception of that one negative thing that Americans still hold against Muslims, which is the treatment of women?
I think it's very positive to see this growth of American Muslim women's political participation and leadership. And I honestly I hope very much that it can change perceptions around women's treatment or standing in Muslim societies or Islam. What I also know, sadly, is that according to the data, women in the Muslim community are less likely to vote than men, and they're less likely to be registered. So while we see these women lit up at the top and breaking the glass ceiling in so many ways, it's not trickling down, unfortunately, and we have a lot more work to do at the grassroots to get women to participate in at the ballot and in ways that really count, that aren't going to be in the spotlight or with the camera running. uh, when it comes to the American public and how they perceive Muslims and the role of women, I hope that these women in leadership positions can change minds. Sadly, what I have observed, and this is not to be pessimistic, is folks are pretty good at creating this sense of exceptions. This person's exceptional, but
Mhm.
everyone else is oppressed. And because they're the first and the only, it's very easy to make these cognitive exceptions for them. So what we really need to do is a couple things. One is to continue to educate the public on Muslim women, who they are, what they want, their accomplishments, and their standing in their faith, and how they feel about their faith. And number two, we need to keep mobilizing ordinary Muslim women across the country to participate more, to be more visible, and to make meaningful relationships with the rest of society.
I think in the past, some women may not have registered or voted because they thought, well, my vote is not going to make a difference. But I think I think they've just realized their own power with what just happened with Mamdani because a whole bunch of aunties were asked to register to vote and come out to vote. These people probably never voted in their lives. And, you have now Mamdani kind of stepping into this public life with such confidence. And this is also a generational shift in Muslim civic participation because I've seen young women even run. What does that tell you about the moment that we're in and the future of Muslim engagement in public life?
I think that Mamdani really gave us the breath of fresh air that we needed but didn't know we needed. And I read that voters 18 to 29 increased their turnout by 300%, which is testimony to the fact that they will participate if you give them a candidate that excites them, that makes them feel seen and heard. So I think that Mamdani is an proof of the fact that people will come out and vote if their actual concerns are addressed. And when we do our surveys at ISPU, we ask people why they don't vote if they say they're not going to vote. And the most frequent response to that question is, there's no one that I believe in. There's
Yeah.
no one that represents my actual concerns. And so it's not just about political apathy, but about the options are often so uninspiring
Mm.
that people don't think it's even worth it to vote between two equally unattractive options.
Yeah, so Dalia, we're kind of getting to the close here, and as a Muslim woman leader who has won so many awards, and there are lots of younger women who want to lead, but they feel caught between being true to themselves and meeting, societal expectations, community expectations. What would you say to them as they navigate that tension?
I would say to them what I often say to my younger self: priorities, 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 priorities. You are put on this earth with a purpose, and that purpose is bigger than getting likes on social media or being a perfect mother, wife, uh, daughter. You were put on this earth to fulfill a higher mission. And if
Mm.
you can focus on that, if you can truly dedicate your resources toward that mission, everything else will fall into place. You can have all of these things if you prioritize the important work and never allow anyone to tell you that you can't do it.
Yeah. Well, that's always a good advice. Dream big and take that first baby step, right? And so, do you like doing anything outside of reading and going through data? There must be something that you do for enjoyment, for joy.
I love hiking, so that's one of my favorite activities outside of work. I enjoy cooking. I love music, uh, and I'm really excited about a podcast that I started about 2 years ago called Quran Conversations, and
Yeah.
it's available on Apple or YouTube or Spotify, and it's a conversation between me and a Quranic scholar about the meanings and healing power of the Quran, and it's very accessible, and it really is for anyone who wants to make the Quran come alive and be relevant in their life.
My last question to you is, what is the one verse, dua, or teaching that you carry with you, the one that you return to again and again?
It's hard to choose one, but I one I've been thinking about a lot is one that says we have sent down the Quran as a healing and a mercy. And I hold on to that because it reminds me that when I'm down, when my heart feels heavy, that there's this resource, there's this fountain of this medicine for the heart that is just waiting to be discovered and unlocked.
Wow. Thank you so much, Dalia. Thank you for sharing your story with such honesty and depth. And I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for all the great work you've done with the diligence and precision. So, listeners, thank you for joining us. I hope this conversation inspired you to think more deeply about the evolving story of Muslims in America, a story that is shaped in no small part by the vision and the resilience of amazing Muslim women.
Thank you, Daisy.
Thank you for joining me on Wise Women. If something stirred in you today, don't let it stop here. Share this episode with someone who needs it. Reflect on what resonated for you, and definitely plant one seed of change. however small. Remember, you do matter, and your actions have a ripple effect. But none of us can rise alone. To explore more resources and ways to get involved, do visit my website, daisycon.com. And don't forget to subscribe, rate, and leave a review, because every click is your way of amplifying this message to others. Wisdom isn't just heard, my friends, it's lived. So let's live it. Until next time, stay wise and stay rooted.